What's up, Fantasy A-Team Nation? I'm your host, Josh Jenkins, and today's video, we are going to reveal our Week 6 waiver wire picks. But before I start the show, I'd like to welcome my good friend and co-host, Zach Roberts, a.k.a. the Fantasy Guru, back to the show. Welcome back, Zach.
Hey, thank you. Welcome having me back. What's up, AT Fantasy Nation? Thanks for tuning back in. We appreciate it, man. We're looking forward to trying to help you guys this week, especially because it's the beginning of the waiver wire or beginning of the bye week. So we want to make sure you hit this waiver wire video and pick up the right players for the right position so you can plug them in and win. So with that said, I'm ready to get to the quarterbacks on this waiver wire video and see if we can't find you guys somebody to start in case you have somebody on a bye or injured this week.
All right. We're going to start with Baker Mayfield. This week he faces the Arizona Cardinals, number 8 against the quarterback. He was 23 of 32 for 305 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He rushed for 8 yards on 2 attempts. He was rostered in 57.6% of the leagues, started in just 3.2. What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, like you just said, so some people have rostered him in about half the leagues or so, but only 3% are taking, pulling the trigger on starting him. So these are going to be the beginning of the weeks where people are going to start starting him. So it's good that for you that could pick him up, he's got solid, good numbers for fantasy numbers. I mean, he did only rush 2 times for 8 yards, but he still actually has the potential to get some rushing yards. He's not a true dual threat, but he can run if he needs to. He's kind of scrappy like that, like a Big Ben. With that said, though, man, he threw for 300 yards. He threw over 20 times. Those are pretty good fantasy numbers. What do you have, 2 touchdowns, you said, Josh?
Yeah, 2 touchdowns.
Those are good fantasy numbers. He's facing a tough Arizona defense. But, see, as we get through these weeks, people, some of these defenses are going to average out a little bit, depending on who they've played and what offenses and defenses they face. So, a lot of these numbers kind of start to even out to what the predictions were at the beginning of the season by the end of the season, because the predictions at the beginning of the season are what we think is going to happen throughout the whole season, not week by week. So one week somebody could have a great matchup and next week they don't. So this is a tougher matchup, but Baker's proven that he's solid and his numbers last week were solid. So he's not a bad pickup. If you can pick him up and play him, if you do pick him up, plug him in for that bye week, or maybe you're picking him up to play down the road when he has a better matchup. But doesn't look like you have much more time to wait if you're going to pull the trigger on Mayfield. So pick him up and play him.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. Next, we're going to go with Big Ben Roethlisberger. This week he faces the Seattle Seahawks, the 22nd ranked defense. Last week he was 15 of 25 for 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's rostered in 13.2% of the leagues and started in 0.5. What's your thought?
So, see, here's another good example. I believe this is a great example, even better than the Baker Mayfield has been. I think 2 weeks ago he threw for 50-something times. Last week he only threw 20-something times. I believe it'll be obviously somewhere between the two, more like 35 times or more this week against the Seattle defense, who's a little bit weaker defense. I believe last week the defense he faced was a lot stricter, harder defense. So with that said, I believe he'll have a better bounce back week, and it's a great time to grab him. You got the bye week starting. You can look down the road and see if there's any better matchups for the bye week for you, if you have a bye week coming up for your quarterback, or even if he got hurt this last week. I don't know who everyone has. So Roethlisberger is a solid quarterback, puts up solid numbers. I look for him to have a better week this week than he did last week. So with that said, you can pick him up and play him, or stash him on the bench. So he'll have a bounce back week this week, I bet you.
All righty. Next on the list, we're going to go with Jacoby Brissett. This week he faces the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're 18th against the quarterback. He went 27 of 39, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's rostered in 0.2% of the leagues and started in 0.
So this is a really good example of why you would pick this guy up this week and play him, especially this week. I saw that they said Tua is starting to throw again, so we're not for sure. I'm sure that when Tua gets back healthy, they'll put him back in as a starter since they started the year with him. Maybe, maybe not. I guess depends on if Jacoby Brissett lights it up today or not today, but this week or not. But with that said, he's got a great arm. I mean, he threw 39 times. What you said, 275 yards. I believe the pick he had too was a tipped ball that got tipped up in the air. I think even if it is, interceptions are going to happen. He had a solid game. I look for him to have an even better game versus Jacksonville. Jacksonville's 0-5. They don't look like they're building on anything. Urban Meyer looks like a dumpster fire over there. So with that said, it's hard by the time you get this deep into the season for you to stand up and play every week for a guy that's like that. So I look for actually Brissett to have a great week. I bet he throws for over 300 yards and probably 2 to 3 touchdowns. I don't think he'll throw a pick, but you never know. Jacksonville could get one. I don't look for him to, have too many sacks. Jacoby Brissett's pretty wily veteran. He likes to throw the ball away better than he does get sacked. So he's pretty quick on his feet. So he's another good example of why I would pick him up playing this week, because I don't know when Tua's coming back. If you have that bye or you have a guy that's injured, you pick him up and play him because he's definitely available. So that's why we have him here on the list for you guys, man. Pick him up and play him if you can.
All right. Next on the list, we're going to go with Teddy Bridgewater. This week, he faces the Las Vegas Raiders, number 9 against the quarterback. Last week, he was 24 of 38 for 288 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's rostered in 10.3% of the league and started in 0.3% of leagues.
Well, it's kind of a tough one for Teddy Bridgewater because, Raiders already have a number 9D versus the quarterback and pass. So they're going to be pretty stout, especially, I believe, this week. Usually after a coach resigns or quits, the interim coach usually almost always gets a win. It's kind of crazy I can't remember what the actual numbers is on that, but the last time I heard it, I was mind-blowing when I looked it up at how often the interim coach after the week following when it's resigned does the team even play better for like a week or two. But with that said, I look for the Raiders to actually go downhill from here with losing their head coach Gruden decided to resign over the email thing or whatever. So with that said, it kind of hurts their team in the long run, maybe not so much this week. So that's why I was like, this is kind of a tough one, but with Bridgewater putting up the numbers that he puts up, and they have a pretty good offense there in Denver, it's better than we thought at the beginning of the season. I just look for them to keep rolling, having good, solid games and numbers, whether they win or lose. Teddy Bridgewater is still going to get you 250 plus in yards, still probably going to get you 2 touchdowns or more. And he's pretty smart. I mean, I know like any guy, he can make some bad decisions, whatever, but he's got a pretty good football IQ. And if you have a problem at quarterback right now this week or in the next couple of weeks and bye week starting, I'd pick Bridgewater up now because he's available. If some of these other guys aren't available that we're throwing out here. So with that said, I think he's a great solid pick, solid quarterback play, no matter what the matchup is, even though he's playing the Raiders this week, who are number 9. I still look for him to have good numbers, 250 plus and a couple touchdowns. So he'll still be able to help you win. You just don't want no low numbers or zeros put up by your quarterback. So last thing you want to do is start somebody who thinks injury prone, et cetera. Guys go out and get you 0. So Teddy Bridgewater's not usually that guy. Even when he gets hurt, he toughs through most of his injuries like a lot of these other guys. So look for him to be picked up if you can and play him, man. I think he's a great play this week.
All right, next on the list, we got Davis Mills. This week, he faces the Indianapolis Colts, 19th against the quarterback. Last week, he went 21 for 29, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's rostered in only 0.1% of leagues, started in 0.
It's like this guy and the next guy, the honorable mention guy that I told you about. Both these guys are kind of the same thing. Both of them end up in the starting role after an injury, struggled the first week or two, and then started to get it together. So looks like Mills is going to be able to figure it out. They would have never put him in if he wasn't a decent quarterback. So you got to remember, even though he's a backup, he's still a top 1% athlete at his position. So the 21 of 29, that's really efficient for 312 yards and 3 touchdowns, guys. I mean, those are solid numbers. This is a gem in the rough right here. See what I'm saying? Same thing with the next guy that we're going to talk about, Tyler Henneke. So with both these guys, they got thrust into the starting role of a decent offense. And with that said, have started to produce. After a couple of weeks, they've started to get the offense and the players to come around and build up some chemistry around them. So with that said, I mean, I look for David Mills to build off these numbers this week. He's going against a weaker pass defense than the Colts. So I look for him to have more of the same numbers. It looks like they're starting to figure it out there in Houston. So, man, you could pick him up and stash him, or, wait for that right matchup. Or if you have a guy that's on a bye week this week or injured, man, you could pick him up and start him, and he's starting to get hot. So, pick him up and stash him or play him. But I look for this guy to move forward. I mean, he's got to play. And like I said, he's a top 1% athlete. He proved it last week, people. So,
all right. Last but not least, we're going to go with Tyler Heinecke. This week he faces the Kansas City Chiefs, ranked 32nd against the quarterback. Last week he was 20 of 41 for 248 yards. He did not throw a touchdown, but he had 2 interceptions. He's rostered 8.5% of the leagues, started in 3.7%. Also had 5 rushes for 40 yards.
Yeah, so he had a horrible matchup last week. He played the number 3 defense versus the pass versus New Orleans. So he had a tough week last week, and he still put up pretty decent numbers. He had 2 sacks also. He took 2 sacks. So last week's numbers weren't as good as they're going to be this week. He's playing my Chiefs, 32nd ranked defense. You saw how much yards they give up. So with that said, I look for him to have a solid week this week. I look for the Chiefs still to get a win. I bet you he probably throws for 250 plus, 2 touchdowns against us, maybe 3. I look for the score of the Chiefs Washington game to be somewhere Chiefs in the low 30s and Washington in the low 20s. I think we win by 10, maybe 24, 34, something like that. But with that said, dude, he puts up solid numbers pretty much every week after the first 2 weeks since he, baptism by fire for both Mills and Heineke this year, being thrust to the starting role so early in the season. You don't have much time in the preseason to build up the chemistry, and then just in a few games, you're right there thrust on that role. So both the guys have taken it, carrying the cross, if you will, for their team, and now starting to produce in fantasy numbers. So, hey, that's good for those teams, and that's good for us people who need to pick up people for the waiver wire. For the bye week off the waiver wire. So with that said, man, any of these guys we've named, but especially these last 2 are like diamonds in the rough, people. Nobody's really thinking about these guys. And I look for them to be more successful in the mid to the late part of the season when you may not be able to play them now, but if you stash them, pick them up and play them, if you pick them up and stash them now, you'll be able to play them later. So with that said, all these picks are great picks for the quarterback waiver wire section. So pick them up and play.
That concludes the quarterback session of the waiver wire video. We're going to jump right into the running backs. Right off the bat, we're going to go with Alexander Madison. This week he faces the Carolina Panthers. They're number 1 against the run. Last week, Madison rushed 25. He had 25 rushes, 113 yards. He did not have a touchdown. He had 7 receptions for 40 yards and 1 touchdown. He's rostered in 50.7% of the leagues, started in 41.9% of the leagues.
So he's a guy you're gonna want to pick up this week and definitely play him this week if you pick him up. He's rostered, like I said, in 50% of the leagues, so he's gonna be harder to get off this list than some of the other guys. But he's producing right now, and until what's the guy there? Is it Cooks?
Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook. And Cook comes back. Madison won't get this many opportunities. So with that said, he's still playing the Carolina number 1 ranked D. So it's going to be a tough matchup this week. But if you got someone on a bye, you pick this guy up and play him if you can get him. So next, who do we got?
We got Alex Collins.
Okay.
This week he faces the Pittsburgh Steelers, number 4 against the run. Last week he had 15 rushes for 47 yards. He did not score a touchdown. He had 2 receptions for 25 yards. He's rostered in 16.4% of the leagues, started in 16.1%.
So I believe that he's a guy you could pick up and stash if needed to be, and he might produce later. This week, he's still going to have a tough sledding versus number 4 Pittsburgh's defense, but I believe that he can put up better numbers than he did last week. Obviously, they believe in him there with the 15 carries, and then, they can definitely lean on him on the 2 catches for 25 yards out of the backfield. So he's proven he's definitely a commodity to be had. I think moving forward, they'll install him more on the offense and he'll get more touches. So go ahead and pick him up since he's not rostered in that many leagues if you need a good extra running back, especially moving forward since we're starting the bye weeks, people. So, all right, who we got next?
All right, next, A.J. Dillon. This week he faces the Chicago Bears, ranked number 9 against the run. Last week he had 8 rushes, 30 yards, 0 touchdowns. He did have 4 receptions for 49 yards and 1 touchdown. Rostered in 40.3% of the leagues, started in just 1.7.
Yeah, so he's a great pickup. See, what's happening there in Green Bay is their offense has changed to where it's like they use multiple backs out of the backfield now. They run a lot more. So that's going to get this A.J. Dillon guy to be a little bit hotter commodity. He's proven that he can go 75 plus all-purpose yards as being a backup back. So anytime Aaron Jones needs a breather or if he dings himself up in a game, look for this guy to get those extra carries that he hasn't been already getting. And with what he said, man, those are pretty solid numbers for even like a RB3. And since we're into the bye week part of the year, RB3s are pretty good still to play. I mean, he may not win you your game, but he's going to keep you from losing, if that makes any sense. So he might not be the guy on your game that goes on your roster that goes off this week if you pick him up and play him, but he's going to keep you from getting those low numbers. He's going to put up decent average, like I said, RB3. So depending on how your scoring is there, but in my league, that would be like the low 20s, whereas some of the running backs get 50 or 60 points in our league. So he's still getting your low 20s, which is better than having somebody puts up 7 or 8 points. So with that said, he's going to keep you from losing your league. Or losing your week if you pick him up and play him. So.
All right, next, we're going to go with Sony Michelle. This week he faces the New York Giants, 28th against the run. Last week he had 11 rushes for 37 yards and a touchdown. He also had 1 reception for 8 yards. He's rostered 19% of leagues, started in just 1.5.
So with Sony Michelle, it's kind of tough because of the way they use the right. McVay just runs the running backs in, and he's the second on the depth chart. So Henderson gets a little bit more of the ball and opportunity than Sony Michelle does, but it's the same thing as Dillon. Anytime that he needs a rest or he's tired and dinged up, whatever during the game, Michelle could step right in. He was a number 1 pick overall, or not number 1, but first round draft pick overall when he was drafted. So he's a solid stud and wasn't overused at all in New England. So he's got a lot of tread left on the tires. He's proven how great of a runner he is. Like you said, he didn't only had 11 carries, 39 yards, and a touchdown. So he's real efficient with what he gets. I look for him to be able to build off that. And as he gains more trust with McVay, he's just going to get more and more of the ball. And you know how running backs are. It's a long season. Henderson's going to get banged up even more than he already has. He's been out already during the season once. So with that said, dude, he's a guy you want to pick up, stash, because he's got a high ceiling right now. I believe he could play a lot better than he has when given the opportunity. So he's somebody I'd pick up and stash on my bench for my backup running back during a bye week coming up, from now until, like week 14. So with that said, man, you can pick him up. He said he's rostered. So.
All right. Next, but not least, Chuba Hubbard. This week he goes up against the Minnesota Vikings, 22nd ranked against the run. Last week he had 24 rushes for 101 yards, 0 touchdowns. He did have 5 receptions for 33 yards.
So he went off. He went off
Yes,
like
he did.
150 yards all purpose. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
No, how much was he rostered though? You were going to say it.
Oh, 64.6% of leagues started at 43.4.
And that's just because, man, when McCaffrey went down, everybody was like, we got to get his back up. So that's why he's rostered so much of him, 64%. But if you can go get him, man, he's someone that as soon as McCaffrey gets hurt again or, anything where he's dinged up or tired, dude, he's just proved last week that he's solid. He didn't get the touchdown, people, but the guy is a solid player. So with that said, it's just like the Dillon and the Sony Michelle thing. At any point, those other guys can go down during the week or during the season. So with that said, man, these guys are already proving that they can take the load if they need to and produce. So, man, these are the kind of gems that you want to set on your bench until you need them. I know that it's tough because bench spots are hard to have, but you can never, ever have enough running backs, especially guys that have a high ceiling. So with that said, these last three guys you said are all that away. So pick them up and play them or stash them, whichever you need.
All right, folks. That concludes the running back portion of the Week 6 waiver wire video. We're going to jump right in to the wide receivers. First off, we're going to start with Emmanuel Sanders. This week, he faces the Tennessee Titans, ranked 32nd against the receiver. Last week, he was 3 of 5 for 54 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's rostered 67.4% of the leagues, started in just 43.2.
So Emmanuel Sanders, man, what a great player. He tore my Chiefs up last week. And he's playing Tennessee, which I guess from last week to this week, they're ranked 32 versus the past. I thought we were, but anyways. With that said, dude, Emmanuel Sanders is a vet, dude. He's always going to run his routes right. He's going to put up solid numbers every week. If he's only rostered in whatever you said, like half the league, he's going to be tougher to get, but definitely will be worth it. You'll be able to play him as a wide receiver 2/3 when you plug him in. He, like this week, I think he's going to have crazy numbers. Like, what do you say he was? I mean, 4 for 5. What was it?
3 of 5.
3 of 5. So he'll probably have 6 or more targets this week versus the 32nd ranked Tennessee defense. So I'll look for him to have even more yards and more targets than he had versus the Chiefs. Probably stick somewhere around the 2 TD mark, but great guy to pick up and play if you have a bye week issue this week or you have a wide receiver that's hurt, not producing. So,
all right, next we're going to go with he's not so familiar in the league. Cardarius Tony. This week he goes up against the Los Angeles Rams, ranked 21st against the receiver. This past week, he was 10 of 13 for $189. Did not find the end zone. Rostered 3.1% of the leagues. Started in 1%.
So, yeah, this guy went off last week, people. I mean, dude, I didn't even have heard of this guy before. And he had a great game. I mean, like you said, he didn't get the end zone. He's obviously a young guy. I hadn't heard of him, so I think he's a rookie. And if he isn't, he's still a young guy. He let it go to his head, got ejected out of the game. I'm not for sure because I didn't get to see the actual game that he was in, but I saw some of the highlights on Red Zone. So I guess this guy has good talent from what they were saying in the highlights that I saw. So with that said, I know Daniel Jones is out this week, you said. That's such a shame because I like Danny, man. I like him a lot. Danny J's my boy. But with that said, this guy's his coming out party, I think. He said 10 to 13 for 189 yards. I mean, that's by no fluke, I don't believe. So now that he showed not only his team, but the league what he can do, I believe they're going to keep getting this guy the ball. I think Sterling Shepard's still injured, so that's probably why he got to play last week. So I look for them to get this guy the ball and install him more in the offense. So, man, if you could get this guy, go pick him up, man. You never know. He could become a Josh Gordon, people. I mean, he could become a number 1 wideout. We'll see. So this is a huge gem, dude. Diamond in the rough. Pick him up if you can. Stash him.
All right. Next, we're going to go with Marquez Callaway. This week, he's actually on a bye, but we are going to tell you guys so you can pick him up and stash him. Last week, he was 4 of 8, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns, rostered in 16.9% of leagues, started in 1.5%.
Yeah, so he's the one that caught the bomb, I believe, from Jameis Winston. So with that said, man, I mean, he was at the beginning of our year on our radar. This Callaway guy was, because he caught another long bomb in the preseason. So with that said, or was it the first game? I can't remember now, but I know that he had 2 where it was the week where he only had 2 catches and like a bunch of yards and a touchdown. So this guy's got a big body. He jumped up and caught the ball, so he can easily be a red zone target. With somebody, like you said, you could pick up and stash. I would. He's got a high ceiling. He could only get better from here. So right now he has a low floor, but he has a high ceiling. So with what he's rostered, you could pick him up and stash him.
All right. Next, we're going to go with Tim Patrick. This week he faces the Las Vegas Raiders, ranked 6th against the receiver. Last week he was 7 of 9 for 89 yards. He did not find the end zone. Is rostered in 21.8% of leagues, started in 5.5%.
So he's only in 28% of the league, so he should be able to be picked up if you need to play him this week. It's got a tough play versus the Raiders in the 6th rank versus the wide receiver. But with that said, too, like I said, man, they lost Gruden, so it's kind of a question mark. A lot of times the team bounces back and plays well when their team head coach resigns or whatever. But I think Tim Patrick's a solid player. I've seen him produce over and over now for a couple of years. He's not much but a wide receiver 3 or 2, depending on who you have, but most likely he's a wide receiver 3 for most of us. So with that said, you pick him up and play him during this bye week, or if you got somebody who's not producing or injured. So.
All right. Last but not least, we're going to go with Rondale Moore. This week he faces the Cleveland Browns, 13th against the receiver. Last week he had 5. He went 5 or 6 for 59 yards, 0 touchdowns. He had 3 rushes for 38 yards. He's rostered in 17.4% of leagues, started in 1%.
Yeah, so he's on a hot offense there. I know that they had a tougher go of it this last week versus a better defense, but Arizona, Kyler Murray, and that high-flying passing offense, Rondale Moore is just going to be, the benefactor of being able to have more throws his way just because their defense is pretty good, which means, and then when their offense plays, they sustain good long drives. So it just means more opportunities for everybody in that offense. Now with him emerging, they've got so many stars there. I mean, it's hard. They're going to double team on Hopkins and Green because they're both big guys, which leaves these other guys, Rondale Moore and the Christian Kirk guy, open. So and the running backs coming out of the backfield. So I mean, he rushed for 38 yards and he caught 59 yards worth of catches. I mean, the dude's a stud. He's definitely a wide receiver 3/2, depending on who you have, but could be picked up and played. This is versus Cleveland 13th defense. They give up a decent amount of yards in the passing. They don't give up as many touchdowns, but they give up a decent amount of yards. So I think when they're playing Murray this week, it'd be a good matchup to play if you haven't.
All right, that concludes the wide receiver portion of the video. Next, we're going to jump right in to the week 6 tight ends. First off, I'm going to throw out there for you guys Hunter Henry. This week he faces the Dallas Cowboys, ranked 23rd against the tight end. Last week he was 6 of 8 for 75 yards and a touchdown, rostering 16.9% of the leagues, started in 10.7.
Yeah, so you guys know he had a solid game last week. I'm sure you guys seen him on the highlight reel. New England there, they love to use the tight end a lot. So with that said, it's going to make it easier with Mac Jones in those those tight end sets, especially in the red zone. So I look for Hunter Henry to get another touchdown or 2 this week. He had solid numbers last week, and Dallas is a pass-happy offense and scores a lot. So if that's said, they're going to be trying to keep up with Dallas there. So I look for Hunter Henry to get plenty of opportunities to do that. So pick him up and play him if you have a chance to this week, or if you don't, if you already have a better matchup and you don't have a bye week yet, you can pick him up and stash him for your bye week or future injuries. So.
All right, next, we're going to go with Hayden Hurst. This week, this happens to be his bye week, so you can pick him up and stash him. Last week, he went 4 of 5 for 40 yards, 1 touchdown, rostered in 1.9% of leagues, started in 0.5.
Yeah, he and that Michael Pitts Jr. or whatever his name is, they're for Atlanta because they both play for Atlanta. They had a heyday last week, both of them. So I think that they're utilizing the tight end well there in Atlanta. Like he said, he's on bye week, so you could pick him up and stash him for a future matchup or someone gets injured or a bye week. So definitely a good pickup. Stash him.
All right, next, we're going to go with Tyler Higby. This week, he faces the New York Giants, 29th against the tight end. Last week, he went 2 of 2, 14 yards, 1 touchdown. He is rostered in 59.8% of the leagues. Only started in 25.7%.
Yeah, so he's a solid stud. He didn't have a ton of yards or nothing last week, but he did get the touchdown, which is huge when you're playing your tight end. So I believe he works hardcore over the Giants this week and has even better numbers than he had last week as far as yardage and targets. But I don't know if he'll get more than 1 or maybe 2 touchdowns. So they got so many offensive weapons there, and LA Rams or whatever. So with that said, man, it's kind of hard to know who they're going to give the ball to when they get into the red zone. They have a lot of options there, and some new emerging options too with that Jefferson guy. He's pretty good. With that said, though, he's such a big target, man. He's a red zone target. So pick him up and stash him or play him if you can. And if you like this matchup, definitely worth the play this week.
All right, next, we're going to go with Mo Alley Cox. This week, he faces the Houston Texans, 32nd against the tight end. Last week, he went 3 for 4, 50 yards. He did not score a touchdown. He's rostered in 0.7% of leagues, started in just 0.5%.
So, yeah, this guy, he's really good. He's an athlete. He's been on my radar for several years. He's had some pretty decent games over the years. It's just that for some reason they don't install him really heavily in their offense there. And I'm not for sure why. It may just be from week to week they decide. But they're going against the weakest versus the tight end, 32nd Houston. So look for him to be installed. He had good numbers last week. He'll be in the offense again this week. I don't know if he'll get the touchdown or not, but, man, I believe he'll put up decent numbers again, like the 4 for 5 for 50-plus yards. So hopefully, I mean, Indy's pretty decent team, and they need to get a win. So with that said, I look for them to play hard this week versus Houston. This is a chance for them to get a win this week versus a team that's playing a backup, even though Mills is performing like we've been talking about. Still gives them a chance. They have a pretty good defense, Indy does. So look for Mo Alley Cox to build off last week's numbers. Hopefully he can have a better week. You can pick him up and stash him. He is an athlete. So.
All right, last but not least, we're going to go with Ricky Seals-Jones. This week he faces the Kansas City Chiefs, ranked 28th against the tight end. Last week he was 5 of 8, 41 yards. Did not find the end zone, though. He did have 3 red zone targets. He's rostered in 0.1% of leagues, and he started in 0.1.
Now, see, that's that Tyler Henneke guy, man. He's starting to utilize that tight end spot, and Ricky Seals-Jones is a huge guy. It's funny that we're ranked so bad against the tight end when we have such a great tight end. You think we know how to cover him. But with that said, dude, Ricky Seals-Jones versus Kansas City this week, if you have someone on a bye week or you have someone underperforming, pick him up and play him because I guarantee he's going to perform versus us. We have a porous defense. So with that said, man, I'd pick him up and play him. He's probably one of the best matchups you have out here of these guys to play this week. If not, he might have another good matchup down the road. You can pick him up and stash him, but you need someone to play this week for some reason on the tight end. Pick this guy up because he's out there.
Guys, that's all the information we have for week 6 and our waiver wire video. If you have any questions, please drop them down below, or you can hit us up on our Twitter page at Fantasy A Team 1. We'll get to those questions as quickly as possible. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and remember, friends, don't let friends auto draft.